Thanks, Dave. So as Dave was saying, up until a few months ago, I worked at Funzio, but that's changed. Now it's been acquired by GREE as of, I suppose it was around May or so. So GREE's, a global social mobile gaming company that's based out of Japan. So I first want to kind of go over the talk, or basically the reason why this talk even exists. As we all know, acquisition costs are rising, right? And there's basically two ways to solve this. Either you can have a really large audience for your game, but those games generally tend to be a little bit more casual, and the monetization tends to be a little bit lower. But on the other hand, you can kind of go for a little bit of a smaller DAU, so basically a higher retaining game with a lot higher monetization. So these markets tend to be a lot more kind of focused on a certain type of player. So I kind of use strategy as a way to do this. So I originally came from the console industry, and it took me a long time to kind of translate all my skills over from the console industry into the social industry. So I thought a lot about comparing them, and I see there's basically two camps of people, right? Like there's people that have a high focus on, taking the traditional games and then kind of taking them to a social platform. And then there's kind of people who have been in the social industry for a while, and they're kind of figuring out how to add, some strategy into their games and kind of take their games to the next level. So I kind of see it as marrying the two, right? On the left-hand side, you have traditional games, very high production, a lot of heavy story, often has like some sort of like, skill-based dexterity, like, how fast are your reflexes in a first-person shooter or an RTS or something like that. And generally, these games tend to ramp a little bit slower and, have a lot of interesting decisions on like, different trade-offs. What's better than, what item is better than another item. And, the play sessions tend to be a little bit longer, right? You're sitting on your couch or sitting in front of your PC for, an hour or two at a time. Social games are a little bit different, right? You tend to play an avatar, which is usually yourself. They're usually asynchronous, meaning that you can play anytime online, and your friends can also be online, or they can not be online. But you can kind of send gifts or whatever it is back and forth to each other, totally not dependent on your online status. And usually there's something happening in the background, right? When you're not online. There's some either there are crops growing or people are fighting you or what have you, right? So there's kind of this activity that's always happening. And the play sessions tend to be a lot shorter, right? And that evolved basically because either you're on your mobile phone and you're on the train, you have to get off really quickly, so the play sessions have to be very short, or it's just one tab in your browser among 100 other Reddit tabs, right? So it's got a lot of competition for your attention. So when I thought about combining these two things, there's always been two approaches, right? A lot of people kind of take their experiences with the core industry and just translate it straight over to the social, either a browser or mobile interface. And certainly some of those games have been very successful. But I tend to approach it a little bit differently. I tend to think that it's still a social game, and you're just kind of adding a few more interesting decisions on top of a social game, right? So, I'm not sure if there have been like very many interesting decisions in games like Farmville, but it's kind of taking that basic model and then adding more interesting decisions on top of that. So I think the first thing is there's a whole spectrum of things, right? Like this is a screenshot from Command & Conquer's latest web game, right? So it's kind of similar to Kingdoms of Camelot or Ebony. And I think the first thing you have to do is pick your audience, right? Like how much complexity is your audience going to tolerate? And this is something that I think, earlier on, people struggled with a lot. Like, we didn't really know what would be digestible for the average audience out there. So I put together this infographic to help us out here. So on the left-hand end, you have games like Farmville and Cityville, right? So pretty casual. And all the way on the right-hand end, you have much more hardcore games like Kings of Camelot and Backyard Monsters. And then a lot of the Funzio titles have kind of sat right in the middle. So this is the basic spectrum. I think you can kind of look at your risk profile of your game and see where it fits into the spectrum, right? So if you're going wildly outside the spectrum, it'd better be something you're pretty sure of, but because I think could be possibly pretty risky. But I think it just helps you kind of judge, where your game is going to fall on the spectrum and what type of audience you're going to go for. So I want to get into some kind of rules that I use when designing our games at Funzio and GREE now. So first, I think there should be interesting choices. And this is kind of just a no-brainer, but what does that even mean? So earlier on in the Facebook days, we had games like Mafia Wars, right? And kind of the strategy with Mafia Wars is just that you invite Mafia members, they can equip weapons, and if you have more weapons and more Mafia members than another person, you end up beating them. So it kind of became this more is better strategy. And this, I think, largely came up because virality was pretty much unbounded on Facebook at the time. So it drastically reduced your overall acquisition cost. So not a whole lot of strategy. It's pretty much just get more of everything and you'll win. So now we start seeing other games kind of coming along and adding more stats. So Mafia Wars, each item really only has 2 stats, right? It has attack and it has defense, right? So attack basically means, your chance of success when you're attacking someone. Defense means, your chance of success when you're defending against someone attacking you. It's pretty hard to figure out an optimal strategy other than just get more of it, right? There weren't a whole lot of stats to balance. So you see games like, on the left-hand side, Battle Pirates here, they're introducing a lot more stats to overall, to balance, right? And I think the thing is here is you can't just add stats willy-nilly and expect to get more strategy out of them. But I think for a while, the industry was pretty scared to even move beyond, just the 2 stats that Mafia Wars had, for example. And if you look on the right-hand side, we have Kings of Camelot, right? So if you just look at the top part of the HUD, you see a ton of resources up there, right? So it's definitely a much more complex game. And I'm not saying this has the audience that Farmville may have or had, but it's definitely for a more focused audience. So, and finally, this is a screenshot of my character from Diablo 3. I think it just kind of illustrates having hard choices in the game, right? These items here, I love the sword on the left because it has higher DPS, but the sword on the right has other characteristics about it, great life on hit, and a faster attack speed. So it's these sort of hard choices that I think I would like to see more in social games. Second thing I think that's really important is adapting to shorter play sessions, right? So like I said earlier, you're not always in control of how long your play sessions are on mobile and especially on social as well. So this is a screenshot from Kingdom Age Facebook that got released a few months ago. So I think this is the basic formula for a lot of social games for me. You make some decisions, you kick off some long-term processes, and at the same time, you're kind of balancing multiple stats, right? And then you log off, and you let these processes kind of run their course, right? So what do some of these processes look like? Here's one, from the same game, Kingdom Age, where I don't think it's super interesting, but although pretty necessary, right? Everyone has these in most of their social games. You're collecting money from buildings. Once you collect the money, that process of that building to collect more money then begins, right? So I think this is a necessity, but what other more interesting processes can we have besides this? So here's an old screenshot from SimCity, right? Optimizing your town layout, right? It literally takes seconds to kind of move cities or buildings around and kind of figure out what the optimal layout is. But, after that point, you can kind of log off and let your city run. Here's another thing from Kingdom Age. On the left-hand side, we have Kingdom Age. On the right-hand side, we have StarCraft, right? So kind of the thought behind Kingdom Age was you build up this army, and you're training your units, and training units takes time. On the right-hand side, you're sitting down playing StarCraft for maybe 20, 30 minutes, right? And you're making all these decisions over that span of time. So, you're training units, you're placing your buildings in your base, and you're going out and fighting the other team, right? On the left-hand side, in Kingdom Age, we've kind of broken up into more bite-sized pieces, right? So, training your troops may be something that you just do in a few seconds. And then, while you're training your troops, you're kind of thinking about the optimal unit composition, right? Like, do I want to build archers and knights because they're really great against, catapults? Or am I going to build like a bunch of ballistas to kind of take down their town? So I think some of these hardcore concepts can be taken down into social games and quantized into really bite-sized pieces, and you can use the offline time that the player has to kind of process a lot of these things. And then finally is we want to make the UI really easy. So here's kind of a research tree that you can research new upgrades for your units and your buildings in Kingdom Age. So with this, I think we could have made a really kind of complex tree, much like you see in WoW, where you can kind of navigate and spread your talent points all around. But we opted for a much more simple kind of UI where you can just select technologies to research. And you don't really see the overall tree because ultimately I thought that would be really hard to navigate on a phone. So we've hidden all the complexity of the tree out and really just allow you just to pick from a list. And as you research new technologies, a new one opens up. Yes, I think you do lose a little bit in terms of, you don't get to see the tree view, you don't get to look at what technology you're going for in the end game, but I think you ultimately get a simpler UI, which I think is a lot more important. So this is another thing that I like to talk about is every feature kind of moving a metric, right? So, in traditional games, we kind of just thought up new features because we thought they were cool or make the game a lot more fun. And I think that was a totally valid way to work in the console industry, right? Because ultimately you just have to sell the game once, and a game its sales are largely based on review sites, right? So you make a game fun, you get great word of mouth, you get great Metacritic reviews, and the game sells great, right? Social games are a little bit different. Every feature really needs to move a metric, whether that be fun, monetization, virality. Hopefully it moves more than one, right? And I think this has been really kind of the hardest thing for traditional game designers to grok as they move to the social space, is it has to be much more of kind of a business-like thinking. So here we have a UI where, I'm sure a lot of people have seen these before, but you're upgrading your building and you need these materials, right? So it's a viral and monetization feature where you have to either request these materials from your friends or just straight up buy them. Another thing I think for strategic games is, they really need to be able to lose. So I think the big reason behind this is that we need to introduce competition to the system, right? So, if people aren't losing, then there really is no competition. There's no way to kind of gauge whether you're better than another person. And obviously, wanting to be better than another person often drives monetization. So this is something that my CEO used to always tell me, is that players should be able to spend a lot at once. And if you look at some games and they often have energy, right, in social games, right? And they have to, often you spend money to refill that energy. And otherwise, you're waiting for that energy to refill. But really, if that's your only monetization mechanic, how fast can someone really spend money, right? They have to spend money to refill their energy, and then they actually have to use up that energy. So the rate at which they're spending money can be pretty low. It's bounded by how fast your energy is refilling, right? So there have to be other avenues, to spend money. And then this may look like one of those overly bold statements that you just say in conferences just to get a lot of shock value, and it is, but there is some truth to it. Yes, we still want to level lock things, just so we don't break the game, but ultimately, level locking things can tie up monetization too. So, these social core games that we're talking about are often whale-driven, right? So that means the big spenders are going to come to this sort of game and spend a ton of money, right? So if a lot of your power is kind of locked up in levels and there's really no way to progress very quickly through your levels, then you're also locking away a lot of monetization, right? So whales basically want to come to the game and become instantly powerful and instantly competitive with everyone else. And you need to provide that sort of avenue for these types of people. So I just want to conclude here. The basic problem is that in social and social mobile, the acquisition costs are getting higher and higher, right? There's larger players coming in, spending more money to climb to the top of the charts. So my solution has been to make more strategy, add more strategy into our games, right? To have higher retention and higher monetization at the sacrifice of some DAU. And I've kind of outlined a lot of the rules that I often live by when designing these games. So any questions?
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
And be sure to repeat the question.
Sure.
So one of the things I'm wondering about, obviously one of the most important things that you can do as a game designer is you're trying to figure out whether you're on the right track, is get your game in front of people.
Yeah.
Play test them, drive them through. You're obviously trying to target a kind of complicated audience segment here, right? Folks who are willing to swallow more than a simple game and less than a very hardcore game.
Sure, yeah.
Who did you target? How did you decide to go that way in terms of playtest recruiters, and how did you filter that feedback? How did you shape your process?
Right. So the question was, with the Funzio games, we decided to go for what's been regrettably called a mid-core market. It's something that's not completely casual but not completely hardcore. So, and how do we garner feedback, and how do we target that kind of more narrow segment? On the one hand, I don't think that the segment is that narrow.